Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's Chamber Forum. I'm Jill Simpson, Director of the Oklahoma City Film and Creative Industries Office. We're a partnership between the City of Oklahoma City, and I am very happy to be housed and supported at the Chamber of Commerce. We're glad you could join us today into a bit of a deep dive on our state film industry, the local film industry, and how incentives impact what we're doing. First, I'd like to recognize our presenting sponsors, Cox Communications, joining us today for a few remarks is Michelle Kelly, Director of Sales for Cox Communications.
Good morning. It's nice to see so many brave souls. Thank you for being here today. And on behalf of Cox Communication and our 1,000 Oklahoma City employees, we're honored to welcome you to the Oklahoma City Chamber Business Forum Luncheon. Today's discussion around the Oklahoma City's film industry is one that I'm sure fascinates all of us, especially as we watch some of the great shows like Tulsa King or Killers of the Flower Moon or Stillwater. The business of film plays a crucial role in the cultural, economic, and social development of many cities. In Oklahoma City, the impact is really seen and felt. With the creation of jobs, revenue generation, and utilization of small businesses that support the industry, Oklahoma City's economy continues to thrive and embrace exciting new opportunities that not only tell our story, but they also preserve our culture. It is an industry that fosters community pride, attracts visitors, and positions our great community as a forward-thinking city that is ready to embrace the future of entertainment. And of course, none of this would be possible without the power of the internet. Whether it's watching films, using social media to provide and interact, or giving filmmakers access to cloud-based services and resources, a powerful and reliable internet connection brings it all together for fans and movie makers alike. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for braving the roads. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll enjoy the discussion.
I'm also pleased to recognize our silver sponsor, ADG Black. Are you here in the room? Oh, there he is. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you both for your support of the great work the Chamber does. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us as we explore how the film and TV sector has evolved in our state and what it means for Oklahoma City's economy specifically. As many of you know, Oklahoma has seen a notable rise in film production over the past few years, and this growth can largely be attributed to the state's positive, proactive approach to incentivizing our industry. Today, we have a fantastic duo of experts who will shed light on the key questions surrounding this sector's development. We'll start by examining the state's incentive programs, which have played a significant role in attracting film and TV projects. We'll discuss impact of recent changes, like the Filmed in Oklahoma Act, and dive into how Oklahoma stacks up against other states that offer their own incentives, and with some of our key competitors being Georgia, Texas, and Louisiana. We'll also look at the broader economic impact of the film industry in Oklahoma, exploring how it's contributed to our economy in terms of jobs creation, infrastructure, and tax revenue. We'll touch on the importance of workforce development, investments in local production facilities, and how the state is positioning itself as a competitive player in the national film industry. In addition, we'll discuss the collaborative efforts between organizations like the Oklahoma Film and Creative Industries Office, Oklahoma City Film, the Chamber, and the state to help build a sustainable ecosystem that supports local talent and attracts outside production. We'll also consider the long-term strategies needed to ensure the Oklahoma industry remains a key player in the growing film ecosystem in our country. I can't wait to bring my panelists up for the conversation after lunch. We have Joseph D. Chianese, right here, raise your hand, who flew in from LA. Joe is Senior Vice President and Production Incentives Practice Leader at Entertainment Partners, which for me is the gold standard of the companies that really are the go-to for the industry, whether it's a large studio production company or film commissioners like Jeanette and Megan. So we're thrilled to have him here. Mark Snead is an economist and president at RegionTrack. Mark just completed an incredibly thorough economic impact of our Filmed in Oklahoma Act, and there are bullet points on the table that are results of that study, tracking the progress of Filmed in Oklahoma Act of 2021 from that year until present, is showing its performance. Please take a minute to review the bios in today's program, which can be found by accessing the QR code on your table. In the meantime, enjoy your lunch, and we'll begin the panel discussion in a few minutes. Thank you. Snead and Joe Chianese. Mark is from Oklahoma, recently completed our economic impact study on industry. We have one in your seat there. And Joe Chianese is here from Entertainment Partners in Los Angeles, an incentives and payroll company. We're lucky to have him here. He came into the Center Film Festival to the panel last summer, and it was really informative, so we're happy to have it back. Mark, I'm going to start with you in the wake of the economic impact study that you did on Filmed in Oklahoma Act of 2021, and you did a deep dive into its performance over recent years. So, considering the positive impacts you found in your study as it coincides with what the tough legislative. Oh, I jumped ahead. Sorry. My cards got completely shot.
Any order will work. I don't think I tried. Okay.
You've seen a rise in film production in recent years.
Let me look at it.
Did recent changes in the state's incentive program in 2021 meaningfully boost film and TV activity in the state?
That is a good question. By the way, when you said you're from Oklahoma, I have to think about, I'm a Georgia kid. Yeah, I'm a transplant. If you don't marry an Oklahoma City girl if you don't want to live in Oklahoma. But I've been here 30 years now, so yes, I am from. When people ask me where I'm from now, I'm from Oklahoma. I've been here long enough to be in Oklahoma, so I'm an honorary. I hope I'm an honorary. It's too humid in the South. I can't go back. That's true. Honestly, I'm gonna have to give you a little bit of just a little bit of economic background, because we first started looking at the film and TV industry in 2020, and I knew nothing about it. And the reason is we never looked at it carefully because it was so small. It was interesting, but Oklahoma was not a film and TV state. It's not our past. And so we have to start looking at the industry just to first learn it. And then you had a small industry, you had a small incentive in place, but there was a desire to build a bigger film and TV sector in the state. For some reason, there's several of you, I think a couple of you here, that were driving this process that really wanted to build something. I hate to say it, but maybe the worst market to start from, except a few of these other states. It was small, really small, and there was nothing here. There's no infrastructure. And so then the goal was to expand the incentive a little bit. We had an $8 million incentive, which, as we learned, was basically zero. And you've been working with that for a while, and then this incentive was boosted to $30 million, and it became a little bit more of a inducement to bring more film and TV producers here. And it kicked off, I think to answer your question, it clearly kicked off a cycle that for us revisiting in 2025 was fascinating, because it generated a real surge in economic activity. In fact, we hadn't looked at the industry since 2021. And I didn't know the answer to the question before we started looking at it recently, but quite a surge. So I think that was the question. Yes, I think it clearly it sort of supercharged the industry here in the short run, and it's highly visible in a variety of economic indicators. If you want to dig more deeply, you could direct me in any area you'd like, but yes, they're very noticeable.
Can you talk to the specific metrics you use to measure?
Yeah, for us, we're interested in, the traditional measures of how many firms there are, how much employment is there, what's the wage base, and what's the average wage in the industry. And we were really interested keenly in the pre-COVID to present period. Now that, luckily, unfortunately, coincides with the increase in the incentive to $30 million, but what has Oklahoma done pre-COVID to current? And we're also interested in how that is, relative to the U.S. and relative to other film and TV states. So what's happened? And we found that there was a significant surge, as I suggested. The number of firms roughly up 50% in that period. The employment base up roughly 50% in that period. Total wages paid in the industry more than doubled. And for us, the average wage paid per job is probably the best measure of the overall quality of the jobs. And the average wage increased about 2/3, pushing $80,000 per job. So it's just a completely different set of circumstances, 2021 to 2025. I hope that answers that question.
It does, and that should be music to everybody's ears here, because those are the numbers that help us move the needle of capital, showing the return. For some context, before I get to the question for Joe, just so for those of you who aren't closely associated with the film industry, production industry, the state of Oklahoma, Jeanette Stanton here is the director of Oklahoma Film and Music. They offer a 20 to 30% cash rebate. Cherokee Nation now has an incentive that can be stacked. Oklahoma City has a cash rebate of 5 to 10% that can be stacked. And now we have smaller cities coming on board, Bethany, Muskogee, Yukon. So that is something happening here in Oklahoma that's pretty unique. I think Joe could testify and verify that. But Joe, for comparison, can you provide an overview of both state and OKC incentives? How are we stacking up with so many different states offering attractive film incentives? What sets Oklahoma apart in terms of its offerings, and how do those compare to Georgia or Texas or Louisiana?
Well, Oklahoma has a very competitive program. The fact that it's a rebate is a very important element. Incentives are usually either tax credits or rebates. Rebates come back to a producer usually within 30 to 60 days after the completion of production, while a tax credit can take years. So a rebate program is definitely much more favorable, especially for independent producers. But right now, in terms of in the U.S., we're in the middle of the legislative session right now. There are 41 states with incentives, but over 160 countries with incentives. And I would say that, and I hate having a conversation with someone for the panel, I don't like the word competition. It's not a competition, but the reality is producers have choices. And I think the bigger risk for Oklahoma in the U.S. is losing jobs to other countries. I equate it very similar to the auto industry. We're losing jobs. I look at film and TV production very much like a factory. So I'm thankful that we're seeing some really positive legislation happening already. The New York governor proposed something 3 weeks ago that if it passes will make the New York incentive the most lucrative incentive in the country, surpassing Georgia. So they're setting aside an additional $100 million for independent film. They're going to qualify independent film up to 40%, which is putting them on par with what the UK and Ireland are offering. So in general, across the board, I think what Oklahoma is doing is very, very competitive, and the fact that all these local incentives we stack on top of it, well, it only helps. And going back to having why I think the industry finally started Oklahoma, I think COVID had a lot to do with it. And the larger producers always knew Oklahoma was here, but they had other options. And then once in the middle of COVID, they went to locations where it wasn't as densely populated, and they got a chance to experience filming here and loved it. Now that they're continuing coming back, so got to keep the incentives going and continue to build up that infrastructure and crew base.
to tap on to what you're saying, a lot of what we're seeing in the industry right now, there were 2 strikes in 2023. There was a writer's strike and a Screen Actors Guild strike. That, you know, while that's good to take care of our industry workers, it did drive up costs. So the studios, in response to those higher costs, are now looking overseas. So it's a very dynamic situation, constantly changing, and we're constantly got to be keeping tabs on what's going on where. One conversation that I heard, one of the studios had told the director who wanted to film here that you're not only going to film in the U.S., you're going to film, you know, not only are you not going to film in Oklahoma, you're going to film overseas. So that's what we're up against, and I think we're seeing a rise in independent film again as a priority. And I know television is something people are looking at, so.
I mean, independent film, I think, is something that, you know, I think the UK recognized, Ireland did, and now New York is that the studios and the streamers would just continue to produce content at larger budget projects, IP franchise projects, but they're not producing as much, so the independents are picking up the slack. And so I think states that focus on independent film are going to really benefit from offering additional incentives like New York is going to be doing, and UK and Ireland. And right now, California is not the most competitive incentive program, even though the governor is probably going to raise the funding to $750 million a year. The program as it stands right now is just not competitive. I would say that the Oklahoma incentive is a much more competitive program compared to California.
And I want to look to you, Mark. There was something really compelling in your study. States like New York, California, and Georgia did not fare as well as Oklahoma did the past couple of years. And it was based on the size of their incentives, I believe. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions tied to there. One is how the states performed, and as a group, the overall performance of the film and TV sector, group everybody together. It's really been basically flat since the pre-COVID period, with a lot of volatility in between. But the net shift from pre-COVID to the more recent data is basically flat. And the question is, what's the composition look like? Which states are doing well and which aren't? And we found that the largest film and TV states, which generally, which we would identify as having the largest incentive pools, but not necessarily. The ones with the largest industry tend to be the ones with the largest pools. But they were the ones that suffered the most in the work stoppage. And in some sense, they were the swing production. Now, there could be a lot of reasons. That could be institutional, the types of productions they had were maybe more concentrated in those states. The other oddity with that is that the states with no incentive were actually the strongest. And second strongest group would be states like Oklahoma with more moderate incentives and smaller film and TV sectors. So I don't know a full explanation for it. Joe might be able to add some context to that would be helpful to us, but nevertheless, and one thing I'll add about California's film and TV sector, if you're wondering why the governor is so intent on raising incentives, that's their oil and gas. I mean, we understand that fully. Super high average wages, entrenched industries, the tentacles of the industry sinks into almost all regions of the state. It is their oil and gas industry, and it's the same, literally the same reaction we have to protecting the oil and gas sector here. So, I think it's a very good comparison.
Joe, what would you recommend, changing the questions up a little bit, considering what we just talked about with facing on production again, which is where we were when I started. It was compete with Canada, because everything was going to Canada. So we're kind of back in that mode of trying to keep production in the U.S. Knowing the scale of where we are in Oklahoma, are there any specific recommendations you would make to us as an avenue toward keeping as much work here as possible?
Well, $30 million is good, but more money would be better. And obviously, especially TV, they look to locations that have enough money that would subsidize not just one season, but multiple seasons. Because you're talking about episodic TV, when they pick a location, they go somewhere where they know they're going to get an incentive, and the incentive is going to be around for a while. So I think more money is obviously the easy answer. It would be one recommendation. Other than that, I mean, you're basically already qualifying ATL. I think that's a big component.
That's above the line.
Above the line, sorry.
Yes,
The actor especially is very important. So probably the most expensive line item on a budget, but not the largest, but probably the most expensive. I mean, if you look at a typical budget, below the line, which is the crew, is usually 60 to 70% of that budget, maybe slightly less depending on the type of project. And just going back to what Mark was saying in Georgia, we're seeing in Georgia, and it's been this way for the past couple of years, typically 80 to 85% of crew in Georgia are residents on the productions. And that was due to the governor's training programs that he put in place. So a lot of training was done to train up those crews.
I have thoughts on that, and I'd like to share and see if you agree with this, that I often see those comments on social media. Why are we putting money toward these programs, you know, when they're not producing the number of jobs that aerospace is or whatever? My view on that is that we have to be in this for the long haul, that we've got to have enough money in the rebate for a 12-month calendar of production so that our crew is not going like this as far as jobs. They aren't starting and stopping and looking to other states for work. I mean, I see this as a long game, not a short game. Do you agree with that?
I agree. So Canada started their incentives in 1997. The first U.S. incentive was in 2001. I think that was Louisiana. Canada has a federal incentive, 16%, and then all the provinces have incentives. So when you bundle those incentives, in Canada, you're getting somewhere between 30 and sometimes as high as 65% back in every dollar you spend. That's only Canadian labor, so your U.S. labor doesn't qualify. On top of that, there is a huge foreign exchange rate benefit. So it's hard for a producer doing a budget to ignore Canada. It's just impossible to ignore. But yeah, I think that's the issue. We got into the game a bit late, and it's been got the states. I think, and President Trump has referenced this a couple of times, if there was a federal incentive of 10 to 15% labor credit on top of what the states offer, I think it would be a game changer. I think we'd see a lot more productions staying in the U.S. because I think we want to stay in the U.S. But the costs here, especially labor costs, are much more expensive compared to outside the U.S.
You were the first person to send me that article, and it's hard to know at this point, but at least we're on the radar on the federal level.
It's been talked about for a while, but I think it's, again, we want to compete. And again, a lot of what President Trump says, the golden age of America, he wants to make America first, and so they want producers to spend money here. There's a lot of money being spent outside the U.S. A lot.
Joe, I want to tap on, let's talk about the U.S. and California specifically. It's long been the epicenter of the U.S. film industry. There are many of us in this room who got our start there. We've seen that change drastically with rising costs of production in California, with strikes, hazardous weather. Have you seen a shift towards states like Oklahoma?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a shift. Absolutely. The shift has started way before this year. I think the shift has started going back to California was one of the last states to actually put an incentive in place. California didn't put their incentive in place until 2009, 2010. And that's because California taxes everyone on their worldwide income. So if you're living in California and you work in New York or Louisiana or even the UK, you're still paying taxes in California. They didn't really care. But when TV started leaving the state, when states like New York were attracting TV, that's when Sacramento realized that it was affecting the tax dollars of the state. So originally the California bill was nicknamed the Ugly Betty bill, because Ugly Betty, the TV show, if you remember, actually moved from California to New York, and I think 1,600 permanent jobs left the state. And that really was the motivation for putting that state incentive in place. So I think that exodus started way before the timelines you were mentioning, Joe. It started in 1997, the turn of runaway production. It started way before 97, when it was less expensive to produce outside the U.S. and in the U.S.
This is a sensitive question, but I think it's one we can't ignore. In the wake of everything that's gone on in California, and I have friends there that are suffering, so it pains me to ask this question, but I have to. How do we position ourselves here in Oklahoma to be viable alternative for studios and producers.
You're already doing it. I mean, you have to basically put out a competitive program, and producers will have to make a decision as to what makes sense for them.
I want to give a shout out to a lot of people in this room. In recent years, Oklahoma City has made huge investment in infrastructure in our industry. We had Prairie Serve, which was a huge success for us and something we're all proud of, and it pains us that we're losing that facility. But we have some other great companies that have sprung up. Apex Post, that's what that was. Apex Post is a Dolby Atmos mixing room, which we're so proud to have at Filmmakers Ranch. It's the first of its kind in the region. What's that? Am I doing something?
Every time you say Apex, it doesn't.
Boiling Point Media, I see Ryan here. They're doing incredible work in the digital animation, visual effects space. You would never know they're there. They've got this beautiful studio. Is it Britain Road or Wilshire?
Wilshire.
Yeah. And producing 1 or 2 features a year, is that correct? So we're proud of them. We have Filmmakers Ranch. I don't know where you are in the room. Amy and Richard James, who moved here from out of state, have set up in the old
Green Pastures Elementary.
Green Pastures Elementary, right on the border with Spencer, and producing films and training workforce, and have all kinds of standing sets. They have Apex Post there. They're the home.
NGP?
What's that?
We have NGP there.
NGP, Nathan Gardaki's company, and they're also the home base to New Year's Rev, a film that just started shooting on the 5th, which is a story co-written by one of the band members from Green Day, Billy Joe Armstrong, and it's a road movie starring Fred Armisen and a couple of the women from The Office, so we're really happy to have that $8 million film here, right when we need it. And then One Set Studio, I don't see Tava here, but they've got a beautiful virtual stage right up on 9th Street. So there's all these incredible things happening, and these are helping us recruit projects, grow our footprint, and set us up for the future. Okay, this is another one for Joe. Sorry, Mark, I do have questions for you here. We both know how dynamic the industry is. We are facing a really tough year at the legislature and a budget situation that is tight, and the governor is wanting an income tax reduction. The lawmakers are pushing for a 0 increase in the budget. If you could have a blank slate, what would you suggest we advocate for to ensure Oklahoma remains competitive?
Definitely don't cut the funding as it stands right now. I think $30 million is a nice chunk of change. I mean, more would be better. I mean, Jill, I can remember when you and I first started working together, was it $4 million? And you did each less, and you were able to do, and you and Jeanette were able to do a lot with $4 million. So from 4 to 30, I think what you have to keep reminding the legislature that these incentives are job creation tax. They create and maintain jobs. And that's direct and indirect jobs, because you hire the employees directly, but they spend money locally in restaurants and hotels, and it trickles down. And I'm sure that was built into Mark's report in terms of dollar gets spent over and over again. Not in the comments, but I've seen many reports in terms of how that happens. Every dollar spent brings back X number of dollars.
Mark, I have the same question for you. You know as well as I do the climate at the Capitol and what we're up against. And we have this beautiful study that just came out that coincides with the beginning of session. So what advice would you offer our film and TV production sector as we push hard to keep growing?
Well, I can't offer advice on what to do with the incentive. We're deeply involved in tax forecasting and in the budget process at the Capitol. But what I can offer some advice on how to evaluate the film sector. And what has happened in the past is this has really turned into a pretty contentious debate two sides. One side suggests that these are really good quality jobs, high paying jobs, and for a state like Oklahoma, these are the types of jobs that really addresses our Achilles heel. If there's a weakness for Oklahoma, it's that group of employees that speak, think, write, and create for a living. That is one of our clear weaknesses, and I think that's the reason why the legislatures wanted to pursue this. So there's this group, and then the other side is it's essentially a waste of money. That we probably should be doing something else with the revenue, and that film and TV is nice, but it's probably not our top priority. And what we find is that there's always a kernel of truth in everybody's argument, but what is missed every time about Oklahoma is that I really don't believe you can assess or evaluate incentives solely with an economic lens. I don't think that's even. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's a good idea, and I think good advice would be to look beyond that. So you generally are creating high-paying jobs. They fit, in a sense, our weaknesses. It is, it brings the usual things, notoriety to the state. It has a marketing component to it. But there's also this entertainment dimension. There's a large, my world economists, there's a large group of economists that just are not comfortable using any public funds for anything that's entertainment related. This is stadiums and arenas. This is film and TV. This even is parks and recreation for many. But economists in general have a really hard time. And the suggestion is that we should be spending this on infrastructure and roads and social services and other things. And the short answer is, if you had to use a pure economic lens for everything we're doing in state government, we wouldn't be doing much of it. Very little of it ever produces full tax recovery. We buy these things because we want them. We spend money on infrastructure because we want better roads. We spend money on arenas because we like the entertainment. And it's very difficult for a lot of the economics profession to understand that often the public values that arena as much as they value the quality of roads we choose. So if anything, the advice is do not break this down to a simple tax recovery argument, because if you do, you're first missing the other benefits that come from it. A lot of these are intangible, but it is a very poor way to evaluate this industry or any other incentive.
Hey, Jill, did you get a chance to review that information I sent you on The Walking Dead in Snead, Georgia, and Game of Thrones in Northern Ireland? And I don't know if you wanted to sort of maybe touch on that.
I would love for you to touch on it. I did do an overview of it. But
I didn't. Well, I sent it to you, but I will do it. So I guess long story short, and you can Google all this, but I'll just stick with Game of Thrones. And it was over 10 years ago. So the first season of Game of Thrones Walking Dead, was shot in Atlanta. And then the story moved to a more rural part, a more rural location, and they were building a state. They stumbled on a town called Snead, Georgia. I happened to be with the producer at the time. It was probably one of the most economically depressed towns I ever saw, with boarded up stores and restaurants. I went there 4 or 5 years later when I was still filming there, and it was a different town in terms of restaurants, hotels, Walking Dead tours. It was just in terms of what one TV show could do in terms of economically change the town, and similar things happened in Northern Ireland with Game of Thrones. So there's that direct and indirect benefit that incentives bring.
I'm glad you bring that up. I'm going to share a little story that I shared last Friday at a panel we did. Oklahoma City has a small incentive program. $3 million was intended to last me 3 years. So we kept the program. Each project can only qualify up to $1 million. Twisters, of course, way more. They could have qualified for more did we not have the cap. But that $1 million working with Jeanette's program is what landed them here. That $1 million from Oklahoma City incentivized work in El Reno, Chickasha, Midwest City, Spencer, and for the $1 million, our return, what I thought was going to be $42.6 million, which was the anticipated spend on the front end, turned out to be $60 million plus. for $1 million incentive.
That's right.
Ideally, they are incentivizing the region. And some of my new friends in the state are city manager in El Reno and the city manager in Chickasha. They love us. And the same thing happened there. You know, they came in and they made certain streets better than they were to begin with. They've now got the trolley from Twisters in El Reno, and it's going to become a tourism site for them. And we haven't even gotten into the whole, like Joe brings up, the whole tourism aspect. That's a whole other secondary industry that we can be growing here as we bring these projects in.
I joke about, I love the Pioneer Woman, and I haven't yet been to her restaurant, but I do see, there's lines around the block to get into a restaurant, and so again, it just shows you the power of television and, capturing people's eyeballs.
Any last remarks before we open the floor? Questions?
Yeah, I think the regional dimension is a little underappreciated. One of the things we looked at was, Pahuska, Oklahoma. Many of you probably went to Pahuska pre-Reed Drummond. It was a very aging city that was not performing well. It had tribal presence, so there was some activity, but all it had was tribal government presence. And we looked at tax revenue and the adjoining cities around it, trying to understand whether there were clear benefits to these regional economies. And what we found was that yes, very significant increases in sales and use tax activity. But as you go out, geographically from the Pahuska, I'm not suggesting this is a problem, but the sales tax benefits were very visible. And as we chose a buffer around it, the sales tax boost didn't occur. It was specifically traced to this activity, is the point. And it can have far larger regional effects than we expected in looking at some of these special cases.
That is one of my goals, is to really work on the regional aspect of this going forward. Thank you for being here today. I think this has been really interesting and informative. And I know we have a little bit of time left. Does anybody have a question they'd like to pose to the panel?
Yeah, it's for,
Do you have a roving mic?
Thank you. Pat Hall, lobbyist for IHOC. Mark, this is for you. At the Capitol, we hear a lot of either in construction industry, pipeline industry. Those are just temporary jobs. Those are just temporary jobs. We don't want to invest in temporary jobs. We want to invest in infrastructure, buildings, long-term ad valorem. How do you answer that question?
Are you saying are pipeline construction related jobs desirable, or can you clarify that for me a little bit?
Well, they just don't see it in the movie industry. They don't see it being permanent. They don't see it being a growth industry. They see it just like a construction job. Every construction job ends, and you go to another job. That's what we face sometimes when we talk about this industry. Well, it's not permanent. They're nomadic.
Yes. Here we go. There's a kernel of truth to every story, right? I mean, every criticism begins with a kernel of truth. And what we saw with some of the earliest states that instituted incentives, they created really small incentives to try to drive a really small industry. Nothing happened, and they pulled back, and it all disappeared. And that is very predictable, and that's where this kernel comes from. What we don't really know is if you have a very small industry and you grow it to a larger scale and it's a little more self-supporting, what happens to it? And we don't really have that type of sample to work with to be able to describe what will happen. So I think what they're doing is taking a special case and trying to extrapolate it to what Oklahoma's trying to do. I mean, we've said repeatedly, you're not going to build a permanent industry unless you have a larger incentive. That is a given. And you'll have to decide whether you want one, is that desirable. But the worst thing you could do is to try to use a small incentive to grow a small industry and expect that type of outcome. Our research has shown that you literally probably be better off with no incentive all the way around than trying to do it with a small one. So we haven't reached the point yet where I think you can even answer that question.
Thank you.
I just want to add one, again, I'm not an economist, but if you look at, again, Canada or the UK, they've been giving away billions of dollars for decades. And again, they have to be making money at the end of the day or they wouldn't be doing it. It's been going on that long. There's got to be an overall economic benefit that they are seeing in both of these countries and in the provinces.
Hi, I'm Lance McDaniel, and my question is for you, Joe. You have been coming to Oklahoma in my mind for the last couple of decades because of Jill and your relationship with different people here. What are the reasons that we have become so successful in your mind? Because I think not everyone here realizes we started at nothing, and now we have a gigantic industry that has a lot of studios run by great companies. And so why do you think we have succeeded in an area where not everyone has?
I think the program has always been competitive. It's just, in terms of funding, just went up. I also know that the film office, Jill, Jeanette, Ava, went out and looked for the work. They actually didn't wait for the work to come to them. They actually went to the events. They kept their eyes on, the trades to see what could work for Oklahoma, and then would speak to the producers. I think you have to do that. Without naming states, there are many states that call me all the time. Why don't such and such know about us? I'm like, because you're not making yourself known. You actually have one of the better programs in the country, but they don't know about it. And maybe I was telling somebody else earlier, North Carolina, 7 or 8 years ago, had some proposed legislation to terminate the incentive. It never went away. But some people today still think North Carolina doesn't have an incentive. So you have to remind people. You have to continue to remind people who you are, what you have, and what you can be. You don't want people to come to Oklahoma, but you also want them to realize what else can be shot here. It doesn't have to always be Oklahoma. It could be Mars. It could be whatever.
I want to share some good news, and that is that Meg and Jeanette and I were all in Los Angeles at the end of August, early September, at the Film Commissioners Conference. And this past year they did a really good job of bringing studio execs in. So there was a lot of industry in those rooms. Oklahoma was mentioned every day.
Yay.
Sometimes multiple times on Snead. And that we are on the radar. I got a call from NBC Universal right after the New Year, and we were just chatting, and I wanted to get him in during session, this particular executive, and he said, just know you're on the radar. You guys are on the radar, and you just have to keep pushing through. People are talking about it. So that's years of hard work, and it's all you guys in the room, and we just can't let out.
When I bring up Oklahoma, they go, that's a great incentive. What about the crew? What about the infrastructure? So if there's anything that you continue to need to develop is your in-state crew and infrastructure.
I have a question. This is for Joseph. We were working on the infrastructure for the industry and all the other incentives. What else can we do as communities to make our place more welcoming to the creatives who run the industry so they want to be here?
Great question.
Again, just continue to do your best to showcase what you have to offer regionally. Before I came to Oklahoma, I really had no idea what Oklahoma was. I think people need to really appreciate what it is and what it can be. They say the same thing. People think about certain states, they have an idea in their mind, or countries, and they don't really know what it is or what it can be. So just showcasing any way you can.
Trying to get Joe to buy a house here. I said, we're trying to get you to buy a house here.
Okay, this is similar to what a couple people have asked, and so my question, we talk a lot about bringing people in and wanting to do this. What about for a lot of the creatives we have here in Oklahoma? What's the discussion around keeping them here? One of my good friends, she's an actress. I know she's had to go out of the state for a lot of projects, and has even talked about maybe needing to move or go somewhere else to be more surrounded with opportunities and projects. So what is that discussion around keeping the Oklahomans that are in this industry here?
I'd love to speak to that, and it goes back to incentives. We, right now, are having a hard time sustaining production over 12 months because we don't have enough money to service and support every production that wants to come in, and Jeanette can speak to that. When we don't have enough money for productions to be here all the time, going back to back to back, there's downtime when people don't have a job. And at that point, they're having to go out of state to find it. So that's why it's so important that we continue to grow this. Because as we grow it, we can expand on the number of productions we can support. That means crew is training regularly. We have places to put people coming out of programs so that we can continue to grow the workforce. And I feel your pain. I think we all feel it.
You'll talk about the panel you did during Dead Center. You had that great panel, and you had one of the producers for Reservation Dogs. And he's, again, a local person. I think that was a really great panel in terms of how encouraged he was about what's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are some really great things happening. Joe came in and did a panel with me at Dead Center Film Festival last June. We had Dylan Brody on the panel, who was a producer of Reservation Dogs. He's now on the show Sensitive Kind. And he talked a lot about how they're trying to hire locally and train people. They're giving back in the community. I think it's a multi-med.
It was for reservation.
Yeah, and they're really creating. My analogy is when I was starting out 100 years ago, my first project was a Francis Ford Coppola movie. I was fresh out of college. I was bowled over by what I saw when I got a job on Rumblefish. It was a family. It was a community, and they went from one movie to another. So when I moved to LA, I worked with the same group of people for 10 years, off and on, moving around. So I think Sterling Marjo is creating that kind of environment, which is a huge opportunity for the local crew base. We are so lucky to have him. He's telling local stories. He is hiring local people. And again, we've got to have incentives to support the growth of communities like that. Tulsa's doing a great job of it. Yeah.
Even California, right now there's $330 million a year, and what they do to make sure this production for all 12 months is they have 3 different application periods where they actually will do an application period just for feature film, they'll do another one for TV, for television, another one for independent, so they kind of keep production flowing throughout the 12 months.
Does that help?
Can I add one thing to his question? That is really a fabulous question, because the economic development community really doesn't spend the same amount of time on the supply and demand of this. The economic development community is trying to bring in from the outside. It's always been focused on it. And the closest you will get is within economic development entities. They will have a business retention division or group or people tasked with retaining businesses. But we don't have a people retention effort within the economic development community. And I think it's part of the language. We have this STEM mentality, and it leaves the arts out. So we try to push that A back in, but it really is a talent drain we have, not a brain drain. And the brain goes with STEM, and the talent more goes with arts. And I think you're going to have to work on the language a little bit. But it's really a talent drain we're suffering in Oklahoma, as well as that sort of STEM brain drain. And we've spent very little time on it. It's all about bringing it into the state, not preventing that outflow. It's a great question. And population growth, I can't stress this enough. When you have strong population growth, it's not as important to prevent people from going out. But the surge we're seeing right now is temporary. We will fight with weak population growth again. It's not going away. And we will come back to that point about retaining the people we have. And your question is kind of out of style at the moment, but that will be the question of the next 30 or 40 or 50 years, no doubt.
I think it's a key question too, because I'm going to get philosophical here, but when I moved back to Oklahoma from LA 20 years ago, the first thing I was struck by was people would say, well, how are you going to get somebody to come film here? Why would they want to be here? We can be our own worst enemies as far as, pride in our place. I think that's getting a whole lot better. But still, it's about recognizing what we have, that we have a great product to sell. And I think it's getting, from where I sit, it's better than it was as far as retaining talent. That's always top of mind for me, and I'd love to. Are you in Oklahoma City? Feel free to reach out. We can have coffee and talk more about this.
Can I just say something to that? I moved to Oklahoma from Texas, so there's a lot of talk about people. There's a lot of people talking about having to take jobs out of state. I came here for the film industry. So, you know, we're getting recognized here in Oklahoma. We're doing great work. Texas was really, and they still are, looking at Oklahoma and going, oh my God, what are they doing? So what Oklahoma is doing is working. We just have to invest again in ourselves.
I have a question, really for any of you, but there's been a lot of consolidation in the entertainment industry. It seems like studios and streamers are just not greenlighting as many projects as they used to. And it feels like this could potentially be the new normal. And so in this world where there's a lot more places competing for fewer productions, do you see the incentive as the biggest tool in our arsenal, or are there other levers we could be pulling, even potentially on a more local level, to foster creativity or things happening on another level that we could be doing?
I'm just going to start by saying, knowing each other, collaboration. You know, one of my goals is to have regular visitors, and I'm really going to try to roll that out this year, but I think there's a value in collaboration and knowing what each other are working on and doing, and trying to grow that in some meaningful way, because you might have a project that you need a crew that you couldn't get off the ground without other people working with you. That was kind of a long question, so I hope I got to the heart of it. But yes, there's consolidation going on in a big way, and I think Joe could talk to that too.
Well, I was going to say, I think the important thing to highlight is finding local stories for a global audience as well. I think, yes, incentives are a key component as to where incentives, infrastructure, crew are the three things financially that the producers are looking at, but I think also everyone's looking for local news stories that will have a global appeal, like reservation dogs.
I'll give you a slice of that. There is something going on in Oklahoma beyond the incentive. If you look at all of the states offering incentives since the pre-COVID to recent period, Oklahoma arguably has the strongest performance in the film and TV sector among all. We go with 38 states offering major incentives, but Oklahoma arguably had the strongest overall performance in that period. So there is something going on beyond just the incentive.
And just to add to that, it kind of ties back to my self-esteem comment. You know, I look at Austin a lot, and they took care of their talent early on, like a Richard Linklater or Robert Rodriguez and Elizabeth Avion. They became a community, and they lifted up from within. So when those people started doing things that became successful, guess what? They wanted to stay in Austin. So I see that as a key piece here too, that we really take care of and nurture our talent so that they don't leave and want to do their projects here. And I know we historically haven't done a great job of that at times. So it's a focus. We don't want people to feel like we don't supporting the projects.